On November 15th, the World Health Organization launched a new commission to foster social connection, and they had the explicit aim to address loneliness as a pressing health threat. Now, this commission will bring together leading officials from around the world, and it'll run for 3 years. In that time, they'll analyze the central role that social connection plays in protecting our health and well being. And they have a goal to release a set of strategies to improve connection at the global scale. Now, social connection is defined as the feeling that you belong to a group and that you feel close to other people. It's really all about the degree to which people have, and importantly know that they have, their desired number and quality of relationships, so that they feel cared for and supported. Now, the WHO is basing their new initiative on the extensive evidence that this sort of social connection significantly enhances our well-being. Now, what happens when we're deprived of that kind of connection? Well, being socially disconnected is a major driver of loneliness for everybody, but especially for older people, for marginalized groups, and increasingly for adolescents. Now, it's been linked to higher rates of depression, anxiety, suicide, and loneliness has been demonstrated to significantly increase the risk of dementia, stroke, and heart attacks. Neuroimaging studies show that lonely people experience accelerated aging of their brain, so they have older brains. And new data out of the UK Biobank shows that never being visited by friends or family is linked to a 39% higher risk of early death. The U.S. Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, he's one of the co-chairs on this international commission. He indicated in the launch for it that loneliness can be as bad for people's health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Yet, even still, as we know, social isolation is widespread. Now, I've worked and studied in the area of mental health for a while, and I've seen that loneliness certainly isn't new. So here's my reaction to all the attention that it's getting lately. I've noticed that we don't talk as much about COVID-19 anymore, but I think that this is one of its lasting legacies. Like so many other of our social ills, the pandemic just amplified our loneliness. It really brought it to the forefront. I've personally felt the entire spectrum of loneliness in my own life, everything from that empty, sucking black void to a more gentle and distant pang. So, given this personal experience, and when I saw this story, I was curious about how others in my network were feeling. I ran a very informal poll on my LinkedIn page, and I asked my connections how lonely they currently felt as soon as they saw it pop up in their feed. A full third of them said that they were lonely either all the time or more often than not. And one of the top reasons they gave me was that it was because they don't live near their family. That really struck me. You know, growing up in a small town myself, some of the fondest memories that I have were just dropping by the house of some family member or another, usually for a cup of tea, a game of cards, maybe some bread and soup, pretty basic stuff. But they were things that it's only once they're gone that you realize how much you really needed them. I think that's what's fairly unique about loneliness as far as global health emergencies go. We actually already have many of the tools that we need to address it. So there's lots of reason for hope here. Now let's talk about some of those tools. I mean, in order to pick the right tool, I think first we have to know something about the job to be done. As Abraham Maslow famously wrote, it's tempting, if the only tool you have is a hammer, to treat everything as though it were a nail. So what's the job to be done? There's really three primary types of social connection. The first is intimate connection. That's usually with a romantic partner, somebody with whom your identities become intertwined. And then there's relational connection. That's what's built with close friends and confidants. And then there's collective connection. Those are the relationships and the encounters that make you feel like you're part of a community. That can be a sports team, a hobby group, places of worship, schools, workplaces. We can become impoverished in any or all of those domains, the intimate, relational, or collective. And when that happens, that disconnection is what fuels our loneliness. So then the first step in improving social connection is to identify what kind of disconnection you're feeling. What type of loneliness do you have? With that information, you can then act more intentionally and more targeted way to fill that need. So if you have a lack of collective connection, for example, you can actively engage with communities that you care about, groups with shared interests and shared values. Now look, sometimes that means you're going to have to step outside your comfort zone. Research shows that as people become lonely, it actually becomes harder for them to reach out. They almost collapse in on themselves. So, if you want to improve the quality of your social interactions, you're going to have to build trust. You'll have to take some social risks by sharing more of your authentic self. And most importantly, have fun. Make time for play. I think if we build these kinds of social connections, it should mean that we then have better access to the support that we need. These kinds of connections that I've mentioned, they correspond to the various types of support that research has shown people need to flourish. There's really three primary types of social support. There's a number of them, but three primary ones. Emotional support, when you feel like you have somebody to confide in. Positive social interactions, I mentioned when you have people to have fun with. And then more instrumental or tangible support, when somebody does a favor for you. There was another study that just happened just this past summer in the journal Nature Mental Health. They found that people who had all three of those types of social support, they were 6 times less likely to be depressed than people who only had tangible support, just people to do favors for them. So building and maintaining social connection really does make a real positive and measurable difference for our mental health. Now, there's some people who are around others all the time, yet they still feel lonely. I think this is a very common phenomenon, first of all, but it's one that helps us to realize that we are not just passive recipients of our environment. We're active participants in our world. So the individual filter through which we see that world, all the stuff that we ourselves bring to the table, that's an important consideration when thinking about the relationships we have. Introverts, for example, have higher rates of loneliness. That could be because they might filter the world in a more closed-off way. Now, not to speak on behalf of all introverts, but, sometimes I, have to ask ourselves, are you walling yourself off? Maybe so that nobody can see your imperfections. My public speaking coach for my TED Talk once gave me a great piece of advice to remember as I came out onto that stage, onto that famous red dot. She said to me, see them and let them see you. That comes back to me all the time. Can people see you? In order to let yourself be seen, you got to let your walls down. You have to be afraid and do it anyway. I think that's one way that we can escape our loneliness, to let ourselves be seen just as we are. Every week with these columns, I do a regular gratitude check-in. So with the topic of loneliness in mind this week, I'm grateful that while not perfect, I've gotten better at remembering that my feelings are not facts. So that sometimes when I feel lonely, it's a reminder to me that what I really need to do is enrich the connections that I do have. I have people who love me and people who I love. So I'm grateful for the times that when I feel lonely, I'm able to remember to gently remind myself that I don't need loneliness because I couldn't possibly be alone. So if you're listening to this and you feel lonely, I hope that you too remember that you are not alone.